This is Lorenzo, and this is the Training Design Taxonomy video series, lesson number 8. It's on the 3 weightlifting strength benchmarks. My question to you is, if you were to pick 3 benchmarks that would represent total body strength, weightlifting strength, which 3 benchmarks would you pick? Write them down and let's see how they match up with my selection. As a quick review, we are exploring the 30 fitness benchmarks that represent total fitness. On the left side of our matrix, we have metabolic conditioning benchmarks. There are 6 in total, 3 of which are endurance, 3 are speed. In the middle of our matrix, we have our gymnastics benchmarks, of which there are 21 in total. 4 mobility, 7 stability, and in the previous video, we saw that there were 10 strength. And for our last 3 benchmarks in the weightlifting category, we have 3 strength benchmarks, which is the topic of this video. So our 3 weightlifting strength benchmarks are the back squat, which is a benchmark of lower body or sagittal hip development. The deadlift, also a benchmark of sagittal hip development, but also a posterior chain core development benchmark. And finally, the overhead press is a benchmark of vertical pressing strength. Now, why these 3 benchmarks? Remember, the goal is to pick the fewest number of movements that would tell us the entire total body strength story. We therefore only need 1 lower body, 1 core, and 1 upper body benchmark, especially in the context of our previous gymnastics strength benchmark selection. Also, the more inclusive the benchmark, the more transferability it has. So for example, I chose the back squat because the back squat will transfer better to front squats and even the overhead squat as compared to the overhead squat to the front squat and the back squat, or the front squat to the overhead squat and the back squat. As for the deadlift, no strength training programs complete without some hip hinging movement. And since we don't have a powerful hip hinge gymnastics movement, deadlift fills that gap beautifully. Not to mention that hip hinging movements forms the foundation for so many activities of daily living. How many times do we have to bend and pick things up from the floor each day? As for the overhead press, it was either between the bench press and the overhead press. And because the overhead press has more transferability than the bench press, meaning people who can do overhead press can also do well in the bench press, but people who are strong in the bench press aren't necessarily as strong in the overhead press. The reason for this is the overhead press has a much larger range of motion. And remember, the greater the range, the greater our force producing potential. And finally, the overhead press also has greater transferability to more weightlifting exercises and Olympic lifting exercises such as the thrusters, as well as the clean and jerk. In other words, and as you can see, the game that I'm playing is that if I could only choose 1 movement to test my pressing strength in both the vertical and horizontal dimensions, and if I could only pick 1, which would it be? Well, it has to be the overhead press. Now, are there other weightlifting exercises that can serve as great benchmarks? Absolutely. The overhead squat comes to mind. The bench press is great. The cleans are great pulling movements. But remember, these 3 I've selected in the context of my gymnastics strength benchmarks. Remember, my goal is to pick the fewest number of benchmarks that would function as assessment standards for the body's 5 physical skills. By now, you guys should know what they are. And also the body's 9 dimensions. Together, they give us 9-dimensional skills. We have hip development in the sagittal plane, hip development in the frontal plane. This is the lower body. Then we have core development in the anterior chain, core development in the posterior chain, and we have core development in the lateral chain. So this represents our core. And for the last 4 upper body dimensions, we have pulling in the horizontal direction. We have pulling in the vertical dimension, pressing, PR, horizontal, and then PR in the vertical dimension. This is our upper body. So instead of the back squat, which is also a sagittal hip development benchmark, we have the pistol squat in the gymnastics category, which I highly recommend you first develop as a unilateral lower body strength development benchmark. Hip development in the frontal plane, we don't have a weightlifting movement for that. So this is going to be the side squat, also gymnastics. We have the leg raise as a gymnastics benchmark in the anterior core chain. For the lateral core chain, we have the side arch as a strength benchmark, but remember we've got the side lever or the human flag as a stability benchmark. For our pulling dimensions, we have the body row as a horizontal pulling gymnastics benchmark, and we have the pull-up. We have the push-up as well as the dip for our horizontal pressing gymnastics benchmarks. And finally, we have the handstand push-up as a gymnastics vertical pressing benchmark. As we can see, the deadlift fits here because we don't have a posterior chain core development benchmark in the gymnastics category, only a mobility benchmark, the bridge. So the deadlift goes perfectly here. As for our back squat, we can see that once you've achieved your pistol squat benchmark, which is good for unilateral strength development, but if you want to develop maximal hip extension power, we need something like a weightlifting movement, such as the back squat, to fill this gap. As for the overhead press, because the handstand push-up is not as accessible to the average person as the overhead press is for developing quick overhead vertical strength, this is why the overhead press fills this gap beautifully. As a reminder, our weightlifting benchmarks are not measures of time or position, but are measures of load. In other words, range of motion. Can you do the movement according to the highest biomechanical standards? So think accuracy. Then we have reps. For how many repetitions can you do a certain movement? Let's say just with the barbell. So think of precision. And then finally, how heavy can you do those movements? Your goal as a recreational male athlete is a 1 repetition maximum. For the back squat of 1.5 times your body weight. For the deadlift, it's 1.75 times your body weight. And for the overhead press, it's 0.8 times your body weight. And for the recreational female athletes, your 1 repetition maximum goal is to be able to do a back squat with at least 1 times your body weight. For the deadlift, 1.25 times your body weight. And for the overhead press, 0.5 times your body weight. So for example, if you are a male weighing 75 kilograms, your back squat goal is to do around 110 kilograms. For the deadlift, 130 kilograms. And for the overhead press, 60 kilograms. For the females, if you weighed 60 kilograms, for example, your goal for the back squat is 60 kilograms. For the deadlift, 75 kilograms. And for the overhead press, half times your body weight. So that would be 30 kilograms. So in summary, these are our 3 weightlifting strength benchmarks. And together with our 10 gymnastics strength benchmarks, they will allow us to achieve total body strength. But for those of you wanting to work on your back squat, deadlift, or overhead press, make sure to download the training routines taxonomy PDF. In there, I have what is known as the squat track, the lift track, and the press track, which will help you to achieve your 1 repetition maximum goals for these 3 lifts.